the silent horror. You know, another reason why there is no God. If there was a God, why would he create gluten? So I don't know. We'll talk about the problem of evil in a bit. What's that?
It's good.
The thing about gluten, I'm making fun of some people have celiac disease and sensitive to it, and that's different. Just like some people are phenylneurocatonics and they have a problem with the aspartame, but for the vast majority of the population, both those things are just fine. This is the latest health craze. It'll be something else some other time. Something popped up and I closed it. I think I closed the window. Well, that was annoying. So we're just talking about more arguments for and against the existence of God, and we're talking about the design argument last time. I can just call up I'll just start my starboard here. So the design argument, again, says if you look out at the universe, it's an argument by analogy. So, design argument, also known as the teleological argument. Teleological comes from the Greek word telos, which means purpose or end. Or sometimes it implies this idea of function. And so the idea is that you look at the universe, it looks like things were designed to function a certain way. Your heart pumps blood. Your lungs breathe in air. So you ask, why do fish have fins? Well, in order to swim. And that in order to, it introduces a function or a purpose or the reason why fish have fins. And so the design argument would say, God designed those fish to swim in the ocean, and that's why he gave them fins. You're a mammal. You're a land creature. That's why you don't have fins. And God, designed things just so. And so if you look out at the universe, you see all these cases of apparent design. Why don't humans have flippers? Why do fish have them? And why think about some of the other examples of design. How is it that your circulatory system and your respiratory system and your digestive system all work in concert to keep you alive, and your nervous system, and they all work in perfect harmony? Is that just an accident? And the argument is that all those things show order, complexity, and purpose. They were designed with ends in mind. And you can't just get those sorts of things through random chance. So that's the design argument says anytime you seek order, complexity, and purpose, you think there must be a mind behind that. And you get it's an argument by analogy. So you see the analogy of the watch, and you see, why do you think a watch is designed? Well, it has order, complexity, and purpose. So look at all the wonders of nature. Don't they have that same order, complexity, and purpose, even more so? So that's, and so if you wouldn't say, well, that watch just came about through random chance, if that's ridiculous, then how much more is it ridiculous to say the galaxies and stars and the diversity of life we see around us and the elegant laws of physics all came about through random chance? Some glorious accident starting at the Big Bang. So the argument is that just is nonsensical. So that's kind of the gist of the design argument. And then last time we talked about evolution. And well, not a diff proof of God. It sort of takes the wind from the sails of the design argument, to use another analogy. Design argument. It takes away its force, because if you can explain all this apparent design through just random mechanical naturalistic forces, you don't need a supernatural designer to explain it. You don't need a supernatural intelligence. So, and maybe I should write that down. If evolution can explain, I'll just put design in quotes, apparent design, then God is unnecessary. You don't need God to explain them. The whole idea of the design argument is, look at all this stuff. It looks like it's designed. If it's designed, then it has to have a designer. We have to suppose that some supernatural intelligence created all of this and designed it. Otherwise, it's just absurd to think that random chance could create all this order, complexity, and purpose. So we must suppose a supreme intelligence who is responsible for it all. That's the design argument. And evolution says, hold on a second. It looks like it's designed, but is it really? And here's an explanation in terms of just purely mechanical forces, naturalistic pushes and pulls, no spiritual beings, no disembodied intelligences, just cosmic rays and bacteria, and you're off to the races. Random mutation, natural selection. And you don't need a designer kind of making sure things are just so. It just happens on its own. That naturally, if you have a bad adaptation, you get like an extra useless limb sticking out like from your middle of your chest, kind of flopping around there, and then it's going to get in the way. And especially if you can't do anything with it, it just sort of hangs there. You end up with 3 eyes or a club foot or missing an arm. Chances are you're not going to live as long as somebody who's got 2 arms and a leg and is, sort of standard human being. If you have some issue, you're missing an eye or you're got some, no skin pigment, for example. It's albinism. You're more susceptible to problems in the environment, and you're less likely to live long enough to reproduce a lot. On the other hand, if you get just a little thing that's going to make you a little better, you maybe, if you're an animal, you blend in with the environment. You're a little more, you look a little kind of like this bark from the tree that you hang out on. And it's just random. It's not like God designed you to blend in. It's that you just look a little more like a tree, or like a stick, yeah. And that little adaptation helps you a little bit. You produce a little bit more, and pretty soon there's more of you and less of the other animals. And eventually you get animals that look like sticks and branches and tree bark and grass and so on. And the reason why they have this adaptation is that it allowed them to live longer and reproduce more. So over millions of years, you get all these improvements in all these different kinds of animals, and that's why it looks like it's designed. And then when the animals are sort of living together, they find the kind of equilibrium. Some animals eat other animals. If you eat too much of the animals, they go extinct. So the ones that manage to survive proliferate, and you get this sort of delicate balance that we see and you learn about in your ecology classes. And it's kind of like, I suppose evolution's almost like, the market. It's like you look at the economy. Now, the government always tries to manage the economy, and usually they're not very good at it. But in a market or a semi-market system like we have, it's like you have supply and demand. And if you had too much of something, then you get a glut until somebody decides, I'm going to drop the price. And you have people competing against each other, so they drop the price. And, if you have a glut of something, you raise the price. You raise the price, and pretty soon, no, I've got this backwards. Sorry, you lower the price, and then more people buy it, right? So, for example, I was in line today, and I'm looking at all the different things I can order on the menu. And I see, French fries, $1.25. Oh, save some money. I noticed the guy in front of me just ordered like one order of French fries. And I'm like, well, I'll just get one order of French fries. And probably the fact that the French fries cost $1.25 makes them a very popular item. Now, if they raise that price to $2.50, probably you get fewer people doing it. If you raise it $3, even fewer people, and so on. Or if they raise like the price of the burgers, or if they lower the price of the burgers down to maybe $4 and include the fries, a lot fewer people will be ordering the fries and more people will be ordering the burgers. So it all sort of works out. And it's not like there's, you do have people making, changes for prices, but then there's like the other eateries on campus, there's the vending machine people, and then there's like off campus where you might buy something out there too. And so we're sort of we're not in a condition of perfect competition here. But if you think about like all the different markets there are for different things you can buy, people compete against each other. And there's no person that says, in America anyway, the price of an energy drink is X, or the price of a burger is Y. It's just that they set the price and sort of guess at what people are willing to pay, and then things sort themselves out. And people raise and lower prices all the time. You see gas prices go up, gas prices go down, again based on supply and demand. And evolution is sort of like that. There's no one manager who's managing evolution. There's no designer saying, okay, I'm going to make the fish like this, and I'm going to make the reptiles like this, and make the amphibians kind of in between, and I'm going to make the mammals like this, and human beings are going to be designed like this. It's just organisms trying to survive, trying to find food, trying to reproduce, and this is what you get as a result. So comments or questions on evolution, or thoughts on that as it relates to the design argument? I'll pose a question, like how about this? What if God designed evolution? Does that answer the objection? God could have designed the process of evolution. You think about it, it's a pretty nifty process. Did that process just happen randomly? So people suggested this. Maybe you can have intelligent design and evolution together.
That's one argument.
Well, let me suggest an answer. Yes, but he didn't need to. In other words, evolution can stand on its own. It's possible there's a God, and it's possible that God established the process of evolution to create all the things in the world. But there's no reason to suppose that's true. And it could also be that it's just random naturalistic forces, and there is no designer of the process of evolution, because all evolution says is you get the first amino acids in bacteria, say, and then cosmic rays, random mutation, natural selection. You get the amoeba, you get the paramecium, and pretty soon you got mollusks and fish and amphibians and birds and mammals, and pretty soon human beings. And it's all this long process of random mutation, natural selection. And there's nobody that has to sit there and say, okay, now I think I'll create a form of life that can that has both gills and lungs, and could be on the water and on the land. And then we have to create this new form of life, which is going to be just on the land. So there's it's this gradual process. You get these amphibians that first flopped around back in the water. And again, it's these small small steps. Like you think about wings is a good example. You think about, well, how could you get like a wing through random mutation and natural selection? Did anybody know what the story is that, or can you think of a plausible story? How could you get wings, the flight of birds just through random forces? It looks like
mutations of fins, I think.
Yeah, fins, that was a possibility, right? You get like a sea creature that comes up on the land and can kind of flap around and flop around and maybe get some lift off. You see the way
Flying fish?
Yeah, flying fish, or you can see some, the way you get birds that can't fly that great, like turkeys, right? So turkeys can't sort of glide and soar through the air because they're too big. But if they're scared, you can see them, I don't know if you've seen the wild turkeys here. I had a friend that startled the wild turkeys recently, intentionally. I know that's kind of mean, but she wanted to see what happened, so she ran towards them and went, gobble, 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 gobble. And this turkey just took off and landed in a high tree. I'm like, wow, I didn't know they could fly that well. So it's, it makes sense to escape a predator. You can take these little tiny wings, and actually, feathers are a very good insulator, and it's thought that feathers and wings were originally meant for warmth. So you sort of take these kind of large membranes, and you can shield your young. You can wrap around yourself. The feathers keep the water off, and they keep you really warm. And birds, probably started as reptiles, and feathers, or sort of a adaptation of scales, is the theory. Again, over a long period of time, you get these changes. And there's been a little bit of tinkering with evolution. Now it's, they think that maybe some of these changes didn't happen that gradually, but they happen kind of suddenly. You get intense pressure in the environment, and maybe the mutations kind of speed up. That's another possibility. But the idea is that over a long period of time, these changes add up. So what if God designed evolution? Well, he could have, but then what's the evidence for it? And you really don't need God. So as long as you don't need God, you can't say the world looks designed, therefore there must be a God. Because you could say, yeah, it looks designed, but it doesn't have to be. If the world doesn't have to be designed, you can't say there must be a God. You can say there could be a God, but so the evolution isn't necessarily a disproof of God, but it is kind of a nail in the coffin of the design argument. So that's one objection. The other objection in the text we have, Hume's counter analogies. So you have the analogy of the watch. And the basic idea is, anything that exhibits order, complexity, and purpose requires a designer. The universe exhibits order, complexity, and purpose. Therefore, the universe must have a designer. For example, look at a watch. You wouldn't say the watch would just put together through random processes. And so if you see those same features in the universe, you'd have to make the same judgment. So Hume says, you could say the universe is like a watch, but what if you said the universe is like a vegetable, like a cosmic tomato. Actually, a tomato is a fruit. But it's like a vegetable or a plant, you might say. So how are plants created? Came from a seed, right? Seeds, spores, something like that. So he says the plants come from, and I think he uses the word vegetation, but he's talking about plants come from seeds, germination and growth. So therefore, the universe came from a seed. And he says, this is as good as the watch analogy. Like you got a tomato, where did that tomato come from? Leave aside for the minute, tomatoes are fruit. I think he's just thinking, again, in general about plants. Well, a tomato came from a tomato seed. Does that tomato exhibit order, complexity, and purpose? Well, sure. Like the tomato has inherent in it a certain order. It's got seeds inside it. When it grows, it turns into a certain kind of plant. And, it spreads out its branches to get the sun's rays. It uses photosynthesis to convert sunlight into food, into energy. It draws water and nutrients from the soil. So it's a complex organism. And then it drops the tomatoes on the ground, and that gives birth to other tomatoes, to other tomato plants. So why couldn't the universe be like that? Like by analogy, you don't think, oh, who created this tomato plant? Oh, this tomato must be designed. Who made the, you don't think when you pick up a tomato off the ground, you don't think who made this tomato. It could just be a wild plant, or just take blackberries, for example. Like the tomatoes tend to be cultivated, but if you find a blackberry bush, you don't think who planted this blackberry bush. You think, oh, it's a wild blackberry bush. And where did it come from? You don't think, well, somebody had to have made it. It must have come from an intelligent designer. You think, well, it came from another blackberry bush. Where did the first blackberry bush come from? Well, I don't know. Maybe go back to evolution then.
Chicken or the egg?
So it's the blackberry, though, came from a blackberry plant, and that came from a seed, or the seeds in the blackberry. And so you don't need a designer when you're talking about plants, right? So plants, transmit order or to say plants contain and transmit order to other plants, right? So and no designer is needed. You don't need a designer of plants, even though we have designer plants.
You have designer plants?
Yeah, like Tangelo or something, right? Hybrids.
Oh, like made by humans.
Yeah. GMO corn, right? To make the high fructose corn syrup with. Mutated.
Banana, the kind you think is a banana, is actually artificially made. Mutated from a natural banana.
There's like they got some, what is it? It's just like a genetically modified one.
Yeah.
It's like the majority of our produce.
The majority of certain things, like the GMO corn is a big one to make that high fructose corn syrup. GMO, I don't think they have the GMO wheat is still in the works, but think about how bad that would be. Gluten, and it's not just gluten, but it's like artificially, genetically engineered gluten to pollute your pure bodily essences and fluids. Okay, so the chemtrails aren't enough. They have to poison us with the food we eat too. It's terrible.
And they give us crappy tomatoes.
So the idea behind the design, or behind this counter analogy, is that you could say the universe is like a watch, but you could also say it's like a plant. Plants just come from other plants. You don't need a designer for that. Plants exhibit order, complexity, and purpose. Where does it come from? Well, it comes from another plant. It doesn't come from a designer. So the idea is that this analogy is just as good than the watch analogy. You don't really need to stick to it. So it loses its force. If you can come up with another analogy, it's just as good. His second one is the universe is like an animal. Where do animals come from? Birds do it, bees do it, flowers do it, trees do it. animals come from procreation. Oops, procreation. You've seen that bumper? There's like one of those things that goes on the back of your car. It's like kind of like a bumper sticker, but it's like a relief thing, and it's procreation. It's got the Darwin fish is procreating with the Jesus fish, and it's your procreation. Get it? So procreation. I think the Jesus fish says creation inside, and then the other fish says Darwin. It's behind, and they're copulating. Anyway, so procreation. So therefore, the universe came from procreation. But the universe did too. Comma. Period. Oh, I knew I was going to do that. Okay, so the idea is you have mommy universe and daddy universe, right? They have some kind of interaction, and here comes the baby universe. Now, you think, well, that's kind of absurd. That sort of idea of, cosmic sex between universes.
Some psychologists get more.
I think Hume would say, well, but the watch analogy, you're not saying, well, that's ridiculous. Like is there a divine workbench and divine screwdrivers, and does God have like a, cosmic eyepiece that he uses to do the fine work, and what would be, is the galaxy like the gear, and then what counts as the spring, right? Analogy isn't like everything in the analogy has to have something that matches in the example. But it's a general idea that two universes have some sort of interaction and somehow create a third universe. Well, so you don't have to take it like super literally. In the same way with the plant example. Let's see. So you have, with the plants, a universe creates something like a seed. It's like a universe in embryo. I guess going back to the animal analogy now. But it's a universe creates a sort of mini universe in its early stage of development, like an acorn or a seed. And then that grows into a universe itself. And in the same way that a seed contains all the order, complexity, and purpose of the plant that dropped it, so you could have the same thing with universes. And so, again, you don't need a designer. When you see a plant, you think, who designed that plant? You think, well, where did that seed come from? And if it's a wild plant like a blackberry, you might think, well, it came from a blackberry. They're everywhere. Don't let those things get out of control. You end up with the cuts and scrapes, or paying a pretty penny to someone to get rid of those things. And once they take rid of it, they're really hard to get rid of. So that's Hume's two counter analogies. He says the universe could be like a giant vegetable or like a giant animal, and those are just as good as the watch analogy. So if those are just as good as the watch analogy, then the watch analogy isn't that forceful, because the watch analogy says you need a designer, but these other two ones, you don't need a designer. Any comments or questions about those? A small crowd today. See the Grovers over there. Okay, and I don't know if we have any more to do on the design argument. Maybe we'll move into the problem of evil today and be ahead of the game. We talked about the problem of evil a little bit last time. Let me see if I can all this up here.
Speaking of evolution, like, say there's gonna be a pizza party in class Thursday, and you just watch people suddenly show up and there's no pizza. Oh, sorry, did I say pizza party? I'm in class.
That would be evil. It was today. So today's Thursday. Did you mean Tuesday?
Most people, they only show up for Tuesday, and then Thursday is kind of like this.
I would think that
Some people are still asking if you're back. It's like, why don't you just come to class and find out?
if I'm back, oh, they must be way behind. It's like the drop deadline's gonna sneak up on them.
And they're always asking me as I'm coming out of the class, it's like, why don't you come in and ask? I'm sure he'll like to talk with you about it.
Oh, that's not what I want. Well, they'll probably bomb the midterm. Or they did. Oops. If they don't know I'm back, they obviously haven't seen the videos either, right?
I'm thinking they're just watching the videos.
But then, like, what do they think? Like, I'm not at the airport anymore. I'm not in my hotel room. So, like, what? I mean, they obviously recognize the classroom, I would think.
Wasn't the classroom in the videos too?
Well, I guess I pre-recorded. Oh, I'm thinking about the other class. Actually, I pre-recorded those in here, right? So you don't know whether they're real or Memorex. That's a good question. I suppose you might think that, but I don't know. I've referred to the trip in the past, I'm sure. Oh, this is the 202 class. In the 202 class, I actually recorded some videos down there because I usually just do audio for them. Just a brief reminder, the last day to drop or change your grading option is tomorrow at 5, Friday at 5. And I'm still looking for a philosophy religion assistant or somebody that wants to do co-op. Our club, the LCC Students for Liberty, is now Young Americans for Liberty, an ageist new name, and you have to be under 40 to be an official member, which I don't like because you get a lot of older students at Lane. Did you know the median age at Lane is about 30? So, but anyway, there's a national organization that's started by Ron Paul, and they're giving us some money and some manpower, and they're going to be tabling on Friday. So, but I can always use help in having student organizers for the club through political science co-op. And it's the silly season with elections and things, and so if you're interested in that, or you have a friend, let me know. And also like a philosophy religion assistant if you have work study. I can always have an opening for that. It's a cakewalk. So if you're looking for an easy job for your work study money, come see me. Yeah, now I tell you. So you got the work study doing.
In the SRC.
Is that the Science Resource Center? That sounds like a lot of work.
And it's mostly just sitting behind the printer waiting for someone to talk to you.
Oh, yeah, that sounds boring. That sounds easy, but boring.
Just read Harry Potter while I'm waiting.
How much you get paid?
$9.25 an hour. You can only take up to 9 hours. Painful.
9 hours?
Oh, shoot. Gotta go back one more. I think. Maybe I'll try 15. No, 13.
It's better in the afternoon though.
There we go. Some of these are, some of the files are PDFs, and those are not going to do me any good. Okay.
The problem with evil, Professor Borrowdale.
Yeah. So the problem of evil is takes the form of an inconsistent triad. So that just means there's 3 statements, and they can't all be true. So one of them has to be false. And the statements in order are, God is omnipotent. That means God can do anything. There's nothing that God cannot do. So it just means God has all power. Doesn't necessarily mean he exercises all power, but that he could if he wanted to. So that God has the power to do anything. God is also supposed to be good, meaning he's morally good. And God, also the third statement, evil exists. Now the problem is when you think, okay, if God's omnipotent, he'd be able to prevent evil, right? Because he can do anything. But if God's good, it also seems like he'd want to prevent evil. But then why does evil exist? Evil seems to exist, right? So you think, okay, well, here's some evil. God's good. He's like, oh, I don't like that evil. I like to wipe it out. I can wipe it out. I want to wipe it out, but I'm not going to do it. So the question is, how could that be true? So it seems like you'd have to say, okay, either God's not really all powerful. He really wants to get rid of evil, but he can't. He kind of does the best he can. Or you'll have to say, well, God could wipe out evil, but he doesn't. That's because he's not really good. God is beyond good and evil, or evil's kind of a human concept. Or the third thing, you could say, well, maybe evil isn't really evil. It might seem evil to us, but maybe there isn't really evil. Or maybe evil is also like a human construct. But it seems on the basis of there actually is good and evil, and God is good and evil exists, and God's all powerful, it seems like one of those things has to go. So what do you think? Which is there one you think that should go, or can you think of a way where if all three of those things are true, that you'd be able to have your cake and eat it too? Have a good God who has your best interests at heart, and the world that we live in now.
Well, if evil is a test, that'd be one way to go about it.
Yeah, and maybe let this sit for a while here, and I'll tell you a story. I'll come back to this for a minute. Once upon a time, there was a guy named Job. It's pronounced Job with a long O, not Job. Job is what you won't have after they raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour for all jobs throughout Oregon. So Job, the story of Job starts out in heaven, and Satan shows up there. Satan's an angel, and God says, "What have you been up to, Satan?" And he says, "I've just sort of been wandering around the earth." And God says, "You haven't seen my servant Job. Pretty good guy, huh? Look at how he serves me." And Satan says, "You know, the reason that Job serves you is what?" Remember what he says?
Just because you treat him well, or
Because he has everything he needs.
Yeah, God gives him all these blessings. He's got lots of healthy children. He's got his own health. He's got these cattle. He's got lots of wealth. He's got a big happy family. And so God rewards him. And so Satan says, "I bet if you took away all his stuff, Job would curse you to your face." And God says, "You're on, Satan. We got a bet." And so, in the Borrowdale paraphrase edition. So God tells Satan, "Okay, you have my permission to take away all Job's stuff." And so he goes down there and kills all his cattle, and destroys his house and kills his family, and as extra punishment, leaves the wife alive. So Job loses, all his children are killed, and all this happens in these kind of apparent natural disasters. So big nomads come and steal his cattle, and then there's a whirlwind comes and like a tornado or something and destroys his house. And so all his children, all his possessions are gone. And then Job famously says, his wife says, "Why don't you curse God and die? Just put yourself out of your misery." And Job says this famous thing that's said paradoxically at funerals, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord, right? Or in the original Yahweh, it's God's personal name. So, God takes things from you, God gives you things, and God can take them away. And that's his prerogative, is Job's answer.
It's also quoted famously by most mothers.
Oh, there you go. Do they insert the word mom in the place of
I
God?
gave you life and I can take it away.
Oh yeah, so that's never had that threat, but okay. So Job, so then Satan says, well, he's still got his health, and God says, okay, take that away too. So Job gets this terrible disease. He's got like boils all over his skin, and they're oozing sores and pus, and so now he's really miserable. And he's sitting on top of this garbage heap, and then maybe this is when his wife comes and urges him to put himself out of his misery. I'll have to look at the story again. I can't remember exactly when she shows up, but she's not a helper to Job, and basically says, if you really want to do what's in your interest, just curse God, then God will strike you dead, and then your problems will be over. And there's the wife, right? that pose is like a transcultural pose. I think this is done by like a Spanish painter. The henpecked husband and the wife with her hands on her sides, saying, "Curse God and die." And here's the phrase. This is by William Blake that did the cover design on the text. The Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Now, Job's friends come along and say, look, Job, you must have done something to tick off God. You must have done something wrong, because God just doesn't allow bad things to happen to good people. And Job, throughout the whole thing, he protests his innocence. And at one point, Job says, you know what I'd like? If God would come down from heaven right now, if he were to be here right in my presence, and boy, I'd give him a piece of my mind. And I'd tell him how I haven't done anything wrong, and what I do to deserve this, and I just tell him what's what. And then at the end of the story, that's what happens. So Job actually remains faithful, and apart from maybe stepping out of his place a little bit, he doesn't curse God. He continues to hold on to his innocence. And by the way, it's kind of interesting here and here's Satan raining down plagues on him, and here's an earlier scene where Satan's coming up to heaven and making the bet with God. And there's his wife with the again the hands on the hips, telling him to curse God and die. But Job maybe he gets a little uppity, but he doesn't curse God and remains faithful to God and still has faith that it's all going to turn out for the best. And so God finally appears to Job in the form of a whirlwind. And so what? Anybody remember what's God's answer? Does he tell him about the bet and say, "Hey, look, no hard feelings, Job. I had this bet with Satan, and I couldn't let him win, and so you're kind of a pawn in this whole thing, and good job, and I'm gonna give you some reward now."
He pulls the omniscient morality license card on him.
Mm-hmm.
And he punishes the other people for being less honest about God than Job was.
Yeah, his
then
friends.
He resurrects or has him give more children and cattle.
Yeah.
I believe God said Job has proven to be a very innocent and faithful servant, so he's going to restore everything that he's lost
Mm-hmm.
back to him.
Yeah, he gets. No, he doesn't bring back his family because they're dead, but he gives them a new family. He gives them some new children to replace the old ones that died. I don't know if he gets a new wife or not. I guess you can't have everything, but he never tells them about the bet. Never tells them that it's like a test. Nothing. And he never tells them that, the reason, Job, that you were singled out for all these bad things that happened to you is because you're a good guy and I was bragging about you. And then I had to prove myself to Satan. He doesn't hear any of that. he gets like this long lecture from God. It starts out, where were you when I created the universe? Can you tell me how I created the stars and the heavens and the earth? And can you tell me how I created all the majestic creatures that populate it? And this is where you get the mention of there's two creatures. There's the Leviathan and there's the Behemoth. And nobody knows quite what they are. I've heard, that the Leviathan, everything from Brontosaurus to a sea monster to I can't remember the other one. To a giraffe, I think, was one. And then there's the Behemoth, which might be some sort of dinosaur, or that is suggested. I'm not saying it might be a dinosaur, but I've heard that suggested. Well, everything from that to some sort of mythical creature to hippopotamus. So they're just those are actually two of the words we have in English that we get from Hebrew. One is Leviathan, which just comes straight out of, it's like a transliteration. It's just comes from one language to the other with the sounds. Leviathan, Behemoth, and Gamal, camel. That's pretty much it. So that's because nobody knows what the Leviathan or the Behemoth are. So anyway, he says, where were you when I created everything? And tell me, are you going to tell me how to be God? And the God's essential answer is, I'm God, you're not. Know your place, Job. But good job not cursing me. So here's your reward. And then Job gets twice of everything, twice the wealth, twice the children, and lives happily ever after. And lived a long life of prosperity and happiness. Okay, so what's the point of this story then? Oh, sorry, then just capsule summary of what I just said. God lectures Job for daring to question him. Job repents and acknowledges his ignorance. He says, I repent in dust and ashes, and he's just really sorry that he forgot his place. And then God rewards him. And then the Job's comforters who said, you must have sinned, you must have done something wrong. God gives them a lecture too and says that they weren't speaking the truth about him. And then Job lives happily ever after. So what do you think, what's the point of this story? Like the person who wrote this, what are they trying to get across?
Serve God and you will be rewarded.
Yeah, I guess that's, that maybe it might seem like things are going bad and you might not know why things are happening. And basically the idea is that you can't know why God does the thing he does, so you should just trust him and obey. And notice in there that God never tells Job why he was suffering, but he rewards him in the end for his faithfulness. So the idea is that if you do the same thing, you'll be rewarded. And you can think about this as it's kind of the lecture at the end plays up the fact that God knows everything and we don't know anything. So we shouldn't question God's decisions. There's an old Randy Stonehill song. It's a Christian rock song. And he says, now I don't understand all the mysteries of the master plan, but I'm sure the master does, so that's okay. And so the idea, if God's running the show, he knows what he's doing, and we paltry human beings can't hope to understand his reasons and why he does what he does. So we shouldn't try to second guess God, tell him how to run the universe. We should just trust that he knows what he's doing and follow his instructions. So that's the main thing. This is the idea that because of our ignorance, we can never know why, and you might fill in the blank here, why kids get cancer, why Trump's ahead in the GOP primary, or whatever. Right?
So that's not God's work.
pick your favorite bad thing that's happening in the world. Why ISIS is on the rise.
I heard they got cornered lately.
Yeah, I think there's the fight against ISIS go a little better. The Russians have gotten involved, and
Oh, yeah.
certainly the U.S. isn't really doing much to stop them. So, but then why doesn't God step in? That's the question. And the answer is, well, we can never know. The second thing, and this isn't like the main part, this is kind of implied, it's what you might call is writer lingo, subtext. It's that God doesn't come out and say, Job, this was all a test, and I wanted to see whether you'd be faithful or not, and I put you through the ringer, and now I saw that you were able to endure to the end. Good job. But that's kind of the gist of what the author's trying to show. So, but the main point, I think, is it's this human ignorance, and then the second thing that's pushed is this idea that life is a test. And then so what do you think about this? Let me actually let this sit out here. Your reaction to Job's solution to the problem of evil. So I get your reaction to the story and the whole idea of the human ignorance as being or life as a test as being an answer to the problem of evil after our 10-minute break. There's the music. I think it was a grab bag from tfury.com. They sell these grab bags where they just throw a bunch of random t-shirts in there, and this was one of them. So it's Gluten the Silent Horror. And now I've got some, and today I brought along some Dave's Killer Bread as a snack. So I'm just heading towards spring break, which is when I'll do laundry. Just pulling out the Halloween shirts. Okay. So gluten. Gluten and God, can the two coexist? I think not. How could God allow the evil of gluten? Well, think about, what do you think about Job, the story of Job, as a response to the problem of evil? It seems that Job is trying to deal with this question, why do bad things happen to good people? And the answer seems to be, you can never know, but you should trust that God is good anyway. And then there's a second answer, which is life is a test, and God wants to see whether we'll continue to be faithful to him and serve him, even though our life is not pleasant and bad things are happening to us. So any thoughts on that? What do you think about that as a response? Satisfying, unsatisfying?
The life is a test part, it works out. Not sure about the other parts.
So, excuse me. What about this idea that sometimes people will say, okay, well, sometimes I'll hear the following from people of a religious bent. They'll say, Aunt Emma is, she's in the hospital again. It's her ticker, and but we're going to believe God to give her the victory. And we know that God loves Aunt Emma, and she is going to be healed, right? And then, Aunt Emma dies. And what's the reaction then? It's like, well, we don't know why God does the things he does. But we just trust this is all part of his cosmic plan. So, and people will often do this switch. They'll say, well, God's my heavenly Father. He's going to love and protect me and take care of me. And then when something happens, like, home invasion, robbery, and, my daughter's in a mental institution, they killed my wife, and I've got a handicap for the rest of my life. I can't, I can't walk right anymore. And I've got all these traumas because they raped and killed my wife, and my daughter's in a mental institution. And so I'm going to go out as a one-man vigilante and try to take justice to the streets. Oh, wait, no, it's Death Wish. Great movie. Charles Bronson, 1970s. But you think about the movie, the original Death Wish movie with Charles Bronson, it opens up with this horrific home invasion robbery scene. It's got Jeff Goldblum plays one of the hoods in one of his first screen roles. And they come in and I think they rape both the wife and the daughter, and they kill the wife as they're coming home with groceries to make dinner, right? So why would God allow something like that to happen? Especially if God's your loving Heavenly Father. And people think God's going to protect them, but yet, people of faith end up being attacked and brutalized all the time. And sometimes because of their faith, right? Because ISIS goes after the Christians, and if you don't renounce Christ, then you're going to suffer some horrific punishment and eventually be killed and have your head chopped off, or be burned alive, or have some other horrible thing happen to you. And if you're a woman, maybe be raped and then be killed. So then what? Where's the? I suppose you could say it's a test, but that seems like a kind of a cruel test. Why does God need to test you? Let me put it that way. Doesn't God know how you're going to act?
I don't like the idea of testing, like there's a God who's going to test you. I just believe that life has its ups and downs. Like there is no smooth or parallel path to anything. I just don't believe in the testing thing.
So well, so why don't you think that's plausible? Like, why else would God allow the ups and downs?
Kind of strengthens you.
Strengthens you? Well, why didn't God make you strong already? Right? Why does he put you through this rigmarole of all this pain and suffering in order to make you stronger? If he wants you to be stronger, he'd just make you stronger to begin with, it seems to me.
He started out that way, and then we had to go eat a fruit because a talking animal told us.
Okay, well, there's another story, right, about why human beings suffer, but then you might say, well, okay, well, that's on Adam, or maybe Eve, if she's
I think it was
the
Eve
culprit.
right first, then she convinced Adam.
But it's like, I didn't vote for them to be my representative.
I didn't vote for Trump.
Right, so this idea that humanity sinned, it's okay, maybe Adam and Eve sinned, but why am I paying for Adam and Eve's sins? Like, why am I paying for their mistake? And is that proportional to what they did? That they disobeyed God's command, and as a result, there's kids with cancer, home invasion robberies, rape and molestation, ISIS, people being tortured to death, people dying of, I think, all kinds of horrible disease, being beset by pestilence and
Hunger, drought.
yeah, all the terrible things that happen in this world. Let me just come back here for a minute. Let's see. So there's two versions of the problem of evil. One is sometimes it's called the evidential or the probabilistic version. And that just says that the existence of God isn't consistent with the world we live in. Or, sorry, it is consistent. That's not good. It's not inconsistent. I should rewrite that. So the idea is the existence of God is consistent with the world we live in. It's just not likely given the extent of evil. That's probably a better way of putting it. So the existence of God isn't inconsistent, or it is consistent with the world we live in. It's just unlikely, given the extent of evil. So you look at all the bad things that happen, disease and old age and hurricanes and earthquakes and floods and a food chain that relies on suffering and death and want and need. So you have natural evil, and that's all these things that seem like they're baked into the world, like that they're part of the world God created. And then on top of that, you have moral evil, which is your home invasion robberies and malicious acts of vandalism and theft and murder and assault. I saw, I don't know, just in my email, all this great stuff comes in. And one, it's like this thug, hoodlum, and his friend is like videotaping him attacking this homeless woman. This homeless woman's just minding her own business, sitting there at the park. He goes up to her and tries to start with something with her, and then eventually he cocks his fist back and biffs her in the head, and she ends up going to the hospital with a brain injury. And he's just doing this for kicks. Now you think if there was a policeman there, the policeman would have done something, right? And you look at this, you're like, this is horrible. That guy should pay for what he did. And what would you think about a police officer that just sat there watching the whole thing unfold and didn't do anything? You think he'd be a bad guy, right? That, there's a police officer. He watches the whole thing happen, doesn't attempt to intervene, even when before the altercation starts, doesn't step in. He just sits there and watches the whole thing. Suppose afterwards the guy, he's like laughing and dancing around and making fun of the woman as she's laying there on the ground, and then just leaves, and the policeman just turns aside and goes back to whatever he's doing, eating his donut or whatever, right? You think, well, that's a bad guy. He should be fired. But then what's your evaluation of God? Because God's sitting there watching too, right? He knows what's going on. It's not like he doesn't know that this homeless woman is being beat up by this thug. He didn't do anything either. So why would you blame the policeman but not have any blame for God who could have intervened? And for God, it's like there's no risk. It's like really, he's an omnipotent being, so he can do whatever he wants. It seems that you ought to have at least as much criticism for God as you would have for that policeman. And you say, well, the policeman, it's his job to protect people. Wasn't it God's job to watch over his children? If God's our Heavenly Father, it seems like he's a neglectful and perhaps even an abusive parent. You think about the reason like people have their kids taken away. It's like it's neglect, like they're not feeding the kids, they're not properly housing them or clothing them. Well, look at the world out there. It's like, if you were just like plunked down in the middle of nowhere, most Americans, it wouldn't last very long, right? But you could forage for wild berries, try to, build a shelter out of trees and twigs and branches, try to find some hapless rodent and hit it with a rock and eat it raw, try to figure out how to start a fire. I mean, that's the world we live in. Now, human beings, with their power to reason, have built up all this wonderful, all the trappings of civilization. But if you look at our world, it's not a very habitable place. There's a few places, Tahiti, maybe the Riviera, where things are, the tree, food grows in the trees, but even then you got the tropical diseases and predators and things to watch out for. Things trying to eat you while you're trying to eat them, right? That's the world God created. That's kill or be killed. So there's like this phrase, the law of the jungle, right? That's where human beings evolved in the rainforest originally, and maybe it moved out to the savanna. So any thoughts on that? The natural evil that sort of seems built into the system, that seems to make God an abusive parent, and maybe neglectful too, because there's both, like he hits us with stuff that makes our lives miserable and then doesn't do anything that helps out. And then there's the moral evil, which is other human beings. This might be analogous to like, I don't know, your older brother is a bully and he beats you mercilessly, and dad says, oh, there goes my boy, boys will be boy. And you're like, Dad, he's hurting me, and you're like, oh, they'll toughen you up. Hit him a little harder, he'll toughen him up. And that seems abusive. But so this idea it's a test, or it's going to toughen us up if we suffer, it seems kind of harsh. I don't know, what do you think? Am I being overly critical? Am I being harsh?
I think it sounds harsh.
The word, the God or me.
What's that?
What the idea of, does it seem like
Testing us.
the world? Yeah, the God created world that's it's pretty tough on us. And so you think a God who would create the world we live in, with all these terrible things, is he a good God? Is he a loving heavenly Father? You think that maybe there's no like cosmic child protective services, but you think that if a human parent treated their kid this way, they'd have their kid taken away.
It's more like with the naughty children that got emancipated and were on their own, and he just kind of walked away for a while.
Yeah, it seems like that there's this idea that God left us alone so we can grow and develop. But human beings aren't, like, maybe not in a position. We are kind of like children trying to find our way, might be the argument. So you think that God sort of, he created this world, but then he's not really, it seems like he doesn't intervene and help us out. And with that, does that seem to you like something that a God who is morally good would do? Like, could you imagine God being morally good and doing nothing to intervene when human beings are suffering greatly? coming back to this, and feel free to jump in and answer and interrupt if you like. Sometimes people will just fall back on this, that, well, God might have a reason, but I don't know what it is. But I bet he has a reason. But I can't figure it out because I'm not that smart. There was something over here?
Yeah, I was just had a flashback to Matrix. Like, the perfect peaceful world is boring.
Mm-hmm.
It's, gotta do something keeps the world interesting if there's a little bit of suffering.
Maybe a little bit, but you think about like what if like the world was like Leave It to Beaver or the Brady Bunch or something, right? So they're dramatic series, so there's conflict, right? There's sibling rivalry. There's kids struggling with school. There's peer pressure. But it's never anything really bad. It's not like, I'm trying to think, Jan comes back from a camp and she was molested by her counselor. And what's the name of the, Mrs. Brady has breast cancer. And, Mr. Brady's got the prostate cancer. Or he's having an affair with another woman, or whatever. Like
He doesn't have enough kids.
Yeah, right. There you go. That's why he got divorced the first time. I think he's a widow in the story. So I guess there's even death, right? But you think about like if God were to create a world full of suburbia with suburban problems, and like TV, there's still problems there, enough to keep things interesting, but. It's not like a hedonistic paradise, but it's a far cry from the world we live in today, where in America we're kind of insulated from the worst kinds of suffering that happen around the world, where people die of preventable diseases and suffer from malnutrition and hunger all the time, don't have basic sanitation. So those are things that maybe we're somewhat insulated from. And there's some people that are homeless and people that get cancer, and so it's not like there's no suffering here, but the suffering in the rest of the world is even much higher because they don't even have the creature comforts that we have in our country, like heating and cooling and indoor plumbing and all those the accoutrements of civilization, medical care, dental care, the things that we kind of take for granted.
I think I read in here it says something like, without rain, we wouldn't have rainbows. Which makes me think of that.
That's interesting. Yeah, without rain, we wouldn't have rainbows. Well, a little bit of rain is okay. I think like Eugene's kind of gratuitous. Like, why couldn't God make the whole earth like Santa Barbara? It rains a little bit in, the wintertime. It's a little cool, but not really cold. And then it's dry in the summertime and spring. Falls are really nice. Temperature is usually it's around between 60 and 75 degrees year round. That seems like a pretty good way to do things. You think about like kittens only get cold in Santa Barbara like a few days out of the year. Imagine like being like a feral cat living in Eugene, or maybe someplace east of the Rockies where there's snow and really cold winters, looking for a warm place to hunker down for the night. Looking for, feral animals rummage through garbage cans, and human beings rummage through the garbage too, sometimes looking for something to eat. So let me, let's see. So here's one answer, and it's this idea of free will, that God can only do what's logically possible, and it's not possible for God to create human beings with free will and for him to create a hedonistic paradise. So God could have created a world free of evil, but it would not contain human beings with free will. Because free will, by definition, you have the capacity to do both good and evil. And so free will makes Mother Teresa possible, but also makes Hitler possible. And that's seen as an explanation for why there's evil in the world. So any thoughts on that? As this is standard defense against the problem of evil. God could have created a world with only good, but he also wanted to allow freedom, which is also good. And God couldn't bar all evil from the world and give human beings free will at the same time. And the idea that it's worth it. That it's worth it for God to give human beings freedom and to allow some evil. Problem solved? What do you think?
It works.
There's a certain amount of plausibility to it.
There's,
Go ahead.
like in the religion of like Vaishnavism or what have you, that there's Earth and then there's different planetary, like heavenly planets, and there's other hellacious planets. You know, maybe the Bible book is supposed to be on this planet and we're down here and we just don't know it.
Okay, I suppose that it could be that we're part of some cosmic plan and we're in down here. You mean we're in the hellish place? Okay.
Relatively hellish.
But then the question is like, why would God punish us in such a place? And like one answer is that, well, God could have created all the worlds perfect, but and here I guess it's come back to this question of natural evil. Where is it? I should move this. Natural evil. So how does free will really address this? It seems like maybe some of these other things like home invasion robberies and being sucker punched for YouTube and vandalism and theft and all the things that human beings do to other human beings, rape and molestation and murder, and down to maybe bullying and teasing in school. So all those things are intentional acts of human beings on other human beings. And there maybe it's free will seems plausible explanation. Right? You'd say, okay, God allows people to be cruel, and he also allows people to be kind, and that is part of God's plan for allowing human beings to learn about kindness and compassion and maybe about courage and so on and so forth. But then what about these other things? Like what human decision led to hurricanes or earthquakes? It seems like those are part of the design of the world, especially like the earthquakes. It's based on the tectonic plates. And that no human being said, hey God, use tectonic plates to create the earth. Or hurricanes or any of these things, disease. These are the things that happen to human beings that they're not responsible for. So the free will defense seems, maybe it's okay at the moral evil, at least it seems to answer that, but it doesn't seem to answer the natural evil objection.
Well, earthquakes and floods are kind of required to maintain stability on Earth, so it's a necessary evil that has good consequences.
But is that best? Is that the
long term.
best an omnipotent being could do? Like God created. He could create any kind of world he wanted. Now, why would an omnipotent being choose to have like a molten crust and tectonic plates? It seems like it's a flawed design. So again, you go back to either he's malevolent or he's incompetent. Either this is the best God could do, in which case he's not really omnipotent, or he did it like that on purpose because he wanted things to fall down. He wanted the earth to shake and tremble. He wanted to strike terror into the hearts of human beings. So that's so it seems like that. And again, you look at like the food chain where you have all these animals with teeth and claws and
In Australia.
Australia.
There are a lot of things in Australia that can kill you.
Oh, are there?
Yeah.
What do they have there? Like,
Snakes and spiders and alligators.
A dingo.
wild dingoes,
They
right?
have spiders like everywhere.
They have giant spiders.
Yeah, and those are all the supposedly got part of God's creation.
Spiders are pretty like important for the world.
Ecosystem, yeah. So they have their place in the ecosystem, but could omnipotent God have created a world without spiders and snakes and scorpions and mosquitoes and flies and just thinking about like I don't know. It's really hard. Like I had some wheat checks, and they're probably a little old. They're in a baggie, and I got it sealed, and that was fine. So I just taste a few of them. Like, oh, these seem fine. I'm crunching on them, not paying much attention. And then I looked down at the baggie, and it's like swarming in these weevils. And I was like eating the weevils, these little tiny bugs. They're like, about this big. They look like little seeds, and I'm like, oh, this is part of the wheat checks, right? And they're kind of old, and it's like always like that. Like, and anytime you try to grow something, or store something, there's always bugs getting in, moisture, and the bacteria, and the mold, and all the creepy crawly things that want to get inside your house, and the fleas. If you have animals, but fleas are a perpetual problem. And out in the wild, fleas run rampage. It's only that lately, when we've got like what's that stuff called, Advantage and some of those other new fleeing things, that life is even livable around animals. So it seems the main point I was making here is that natural evil doesn't seem amenable to the free will defense. Or I don't know if somebody could explain to me how that would work. Human beings didn't create the earth or the conditions under which we live. They might make it a little worse in some places, a little better in other places. But it's still, this is the world that we were plunked down in, and it seems like that's God's doing. And it's fairly hostile to humans most places. And there's only really a few places where people kind of sit around and lay in the sun and pick fruit off the trees and not have to work that much. And even in those places, you gotta sort of always be looking over your shoulder for some poisonous snake that's gonna kill you. All right. How about this? How about the spiritual development theodicy? So theodicy is just an attempt to solve the problem of evil without admitting that God's not omnipotent, without admitting that God's not good, and without saying that evil isn't real. So you accept all three of those things, and you say, but God wanted to give human beings free will. Or the second one that often goes hand in hand with the spiritual development theodicy with the free will theodicy is the spiritual development theodicy. And this is, you alluded to this earlier, Robbie did. He said that, well, maybe God wants to sort of help us develop into stronger people. And so what do you think about that? As this is not quite life as a test, but it's that suffering builds character. How about that as a justification? You go through tough times. Think about presidential stuff. Ben Carson in his bio writes about his tough upbringing, and growing up through poverty and rising and finally becoming a neurosurgeon and all the trials he went through. And you might say, well, he became a better person through that. Going the other way, trying to become a politician, but at least for a while there, he was doing pretty good, right? So he's, and if life was easy and everybody could just become a neurosurgeon, then where's the
Value.
Yeah, where's the value in it, right? If it's too easy. So does this seem, maybe we combine free will theodicy and spiritual development thing, maybe?
We can choose to become better.
Well, how about this so the idea is that we need to go through all the suffering to build character. First, you ask the question, does suffering always build character?
No. Or I guess you want to count bad character.
Yeah. It seems like you look at like people in prison, for example, they usually had like really bad childhoods. Abusive and neglectful parents, I grew up in poverty, bad peers. So it seems like even though we pay attention to maybe the Ben Carsons, most people that grew up in a circumstance, ended up not doing quite as well. And does that mean there's something special about him? Well, maybe, but you can't say that, oh, this suffering builds character automatically then. And often it ends up like screwing people up and they end up having to go to therapy and with lots of psychological problems. They get the the bipolar, the borderline personality disorder, other issues, anxiety. What's that?
The fun one.
The fun one, yeah. All these different disorders that people have come from having lives of abuse and neglect growing up. And if the suffering really built character, then what would you say? Like some guy, you bring him in for child molestation, and you say, sir, did you know that the court would like to know that the defendant are aware that sexual abuse of a minor leads to deep-seated psychological problems? And suppose the guy says, but think about the learning opportunities. Suffering builds character, right? That wouldn't be a defense. So if it's not a defense for the guy that did it, why is it a defense for God that he doesn't intervene? It seems like if suffering builds characters, then you ought to like let out the rapists and the thieves and the molesters and the murderers and let them go out there and build character, right? Maybe you want to increase you disband the police, right? And what else would you do? Maybe you should like
quoting Batman by now.
There you go. Yeah, this is be like the Joker, cause chaos and anarchy.
I was thinking the Dark Knight.
Oh, okay.
Bane.
What was the quote?
It's been a while. There were so many quotes out of Bane, I can't remember.
Was it was the idea to disband the police and
Let the criminals run free, take the city for yourself,
yeah.
be free, and then you're just gonna nuke them all.
Yeah, so this, if suffering builds character, then why do we punish people that cause others to suffer? Maybe we should be rewarding them, right? So maybe what you should go out, like it's the most noble thing you could do, maybe on this theory, would be go out and cause trouble. Go out and maybe slash somebody's tire, maybe key another car, break some windows, steal some stuff, sneak up on somebody and hit them over the head, take their wallet and throw it in a dumpster 3 blocks away. Don't take the money, because that would be wrong. That's theft. Or take the money and go to a busy intersection and throw it in the middle and watch people try to go out on the money and get hit by cars. Right? Why wouldn't you do that? Oh, it causes suffering and misery for other human beings. That's bad. Well, but why is it bad if you do it, but it's okay if God does it? The other thing is that maybe with the spiritual development theodicy, why didn't God just make us that way in the first place? God wants us to be a certain way. He could have just, poof, there's human beings ready to go. Instead of putting them through, 70, 80 years of toil and suffering and human degradation. And then at the end of it all, taking us and saying, sorry I had to put you through this, but it's all part of my plan. Wipes away your tears and says, welcome to heaven. Right? Why doesn't he just create you in heaven in the first place? Why go through all this rigmarole? He's an omnipotent being, right? He can do anything. So why would he put you through all this? And when you think about it that way, you think, maybe this is like a story that people tell themselves to feel better about all the suffering that's around them. And there's this sort of idea that God's putting us to the test, and that at the end of the test, everything's going to be great. But maybe it's just a way of dealing with the fact that life sucks. And we create this kind of fantasy of a reward at the end, and some guy who's refereeing it all, when really there's no referee and there's no reward, it's just, this is what it is. So that's the argument, I think, against these theodicies, the free will and spiritual development theodicy. And the third one, I don't know if the ignorance theodicy really is a true theodicy, but I throw it in there. And basically this is like the last ditch effort to say, well, I don't know what the reason is, but God probably has one, or God has to have one. And as a human being, you shouldn't expect to know what it is. On this last one, think about, I don't know, so take Charles Manson, for example. Like, I'd ask, like, what do you know about Charles Manson? And you say, well, he's like that crazy guy with like the long hair and beard. Okay. There's a lot of those out there. But he's the guy that arranged the Tate LaBianca murders. So do you remember why he did that? Well, I read it seems like I read a long time ago this book that said it was like this plan to start a race war. That he had this idea that he'd kill these rich white movie stars and make it look like black people did it, start a race war, and somehow end up on ruler of the world. Kind of crazy, right? So that was his plan. Suppose I would say, that was part of his plan, but you don't know the whole plan. And I went to visit Charlie in prison. He told me what the whole plan is. And if I were to tell you what that plan is right now, you'd think that Charlie Manson is the most moral man that ever lived, and that he's doing God's work. So what would you think if I were to tell you that? Would you be skeptical? Or would you say, would you like tell me? I say, Charlie swore me to secrecy, so I can't tell you. But he's really a good guy. You should get to know.
I think you were crazy.
Yeah, right. So, okay, so Charles Manson, he killed 5 people, right? And he didn't even actually do the killing himself, but he kind of sent out his henchmen to do it. A bunch of teenagers strung out on acid and under his control and spell. He's just like this 2-bit hood who had a kind of a crazy cult following in the 70s. But think about all the things that God could have prevented and didn't, or all the things that God created that make our lives miserable. Think about everything that Charles Manson did, God could have prevented, but he didn't do it.
Charles Manson thought he was God, right?
That's true, right?
How'd that work for him?
I'm trying to think. He thought a lot of different things. I remember one of his quotes was, God is the devil and the devil is God. I think he's just crazy. So if you wouldn't accept that with Charles Manson, because you'd say, okay, but anybody who would kill a bunch of innocent people, including a pregnant woman, and in order to start a race war, there's no possible justification you could give me that could show that that was the right thing to do. It's just not. It's ludicrous to say that could be justified. So then, Charles Manson's kind of a penny ante, player in the world of evil. Why would you think you'd be able to get God off the hook for all this stuff that he's both done and allowed? So the analogy is, if you say there's no possible explanation that could get Manson off the hook, some secret reason, why would you think that there might even be a secret reason why God allows all the horrible things to happen? So that would be the argument. So what do you think about that? It seems like God's got to be a lot worse than Charles Manson if you just look at all the stuff that he allows and does. And maybe to put it one more way, everything that Charles Manson did, he did with God's permission, right? Because God could have stepped in any time. And he wouldn't even have to be really obvious about it. God could make an anonymous phone call to the police. He could have, maybe sent a twinge of remorse to just one of the actors and get him to stop the thing. Or he could have maybe given Charles Manson an aneurysm and had him die of apparently natural causes. So there's lots of things he could have done, but he didn't do anything, and he just let it play out. So then the question is, what possible excuse could God have for allowing that and all the other murders and suffering that human beings have ever faced? And if you're not going to, if you're just going to turn a blind eye to, oh, here's the reason why Charles Manson seems like he's a bad guy, but really he's okay, why would you think that you could get God off the hook for all the things that he allows? Any thoughts?
Is it a matter of remorse?
I think Manson has no remorse.
Yeah, so he's a pure evil asshole, so.
But is God, would it matter if God was sorry for it? Like,
Did he feel bad, but he still has to do it for some reason?
why, it seems like almost nonsensical that a loving Heavenly Father would allow, just fill in the blank, like a horrible thing. You see anything horrible in the news lately? Or you ever read a story that made you think that's like the worst thing I ever read?
Westboro Baptist Church, their family story. That was horrible.
What story?
The guy who ran the Westboro Baptist Church, he was an absolute nightmare to his family.
Oh, Fred
I read a
Phelps.
story in there,
Yeah.
and I just felt sick by the end of it.
Oh.
Although it ended happy, they were all gone. He's dead now.
And then his daughter carrying on his legacy.
I don't know. I choose not to remember that story too much. I'm
Yeah,
not
so like
considering-
crazy cults. Think about, I used to like, and maybe I should I'll pull some headlines for next time. One headline I remember is man videotaped baby rape. So this guy, he raped like an infant and he videotaped it. There's another one, there's a story of this girl named Jessica Lunsford who was abducted and sexually abused by a meth addict and then buried alive in a plastic bag with her teddy bear and suffocated. So you read something like that and you think, well, God just let that whole thing play out and he didn't lift a finger to help. And he could have, but he didn't. And so that's the big question mark in the problem of evil. If you look at these concrete cases and you think, at any moment God could have done something, but he didn't. Now, often you'll hear these stories of miraculous survival. A person will say, there's a fiery plane crash, and the survivor will say, God saved me from this plane crash. But usually he doesn't say, and all those other poor schmoes, they died horribly, but me, God saved me for some reason. So then what about all those other people, I always wonder. So sometimes people get in a pickle where like they get in some horrific car accident and the car is mangled beyond recognition and they come out with just a few cuts and scrapes. And they say it was a miracle, God saved me. But you think about all the other people who are in car crashes who end up having like serious injuries or death. And you think, well, why didn't God save those people? And the people that end up being saved don't seem to be especially spiritual or moral compared to the general population. And so it looks like, if you look at those cases, it just kind of looks random. Like that guy got lucky. The other 1,000 people that got in that kind of type of wreck, they all died or had terrible injuries. This guy is the 1 in 1,000 where, 0.1% cases where he got off okay. So this is a problem, I should say, this is a problem for Western philosophy and for the kind of Judeo-Christian and Islamic concept of God as a personal being, as a being who's moral, who's the ground of right and wrong, good and evil, and is morally good. And so the Eastern philosophies and religions will they'll get around the theodicy, and the theodicy doesn't get going here because they'll they'll usually deny that good and evil are actual categories of reality, or they'll deny that evil exists. So you get this in Christian Science, this kind of Easternized version of Christianity. And they'll say God is both good and evil, or beyond good and evil, or that God's not even a person, so God doesn't have intention or action. It's sort of God's a kind of a cosmic principle. So it's not like he does anything or he could intervene. God is seen as like permeating the universe or part of the universe. And God's kind of like the law of gravity or an impersonal force as opposed to a personal being. But if you have God as a personal being who's supposed to be morally good, then you get this problem of evil. Like, how is such a being consistent with the kind of world that we live in? Final comments, questions, responses? We got about a minute left. Any thoughts?
I probably agree with the free will.
The free will theodicy seems like the best bet. All right, and that's usually that's the one that resonates with people the most. So God couldn't have created a world which is where there's no evil and where human beings are free. So he had to make a choice. But then what about like the natural world and all the suffering that seems built into that? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think I just believe that God is like you said, a non-personal force.
Okay, so back to the Eastern concept.
Yeah.
All right, there is the music. I'll see you guys on Tuesday. I want to talk to you a little bit more about arguments for and against the existence of God. You do.